I never wanted to work at Whispering Pines Rural Health Clinic. But when you're a newly licensed RN with $87,000 in student loan debt and your grandmother's medical bills to help pay, you don't have the luxury of being picky, especially not in Millfield, Ohio, where the coal mines closed down 15 years ago and half the storefronts on Main Street are boarded up with faded for lease signs. The night shift paid an extra $7 per hour. That was enough for me to say yes without asking too many questions. My first red flag should have been the relief in Administrator Harmon's eyes when I accepted the position. The second should have been the way the day nurses avoided eye contact when I showed up for orientation. The third, and what should have been the unmistakable warning, was the sealed envelope handed to me on my first night. "Don't open it until Margaret leaves," Harmon had said, pressing the envelope into my hand with a grip too tight to be casual. "And Ellie? Follow them to the letter." Margaret was the evening nurse, a gray-haired woman with nicotine-stained fingers and the permanent scowl of someone who'd seen too much. She spent exactly 45 minutes showing me around the small clinic, 10 patient rooms, a modest lab, an ancient X-ray machine, and a small pharmacy behind a locked metal gate. "We don't get many emergencies at night," she said, her voice flat. "Folks around here know to go to Athens if it's serious." Athens was nearly an hour away. "But we're still open?" I asked, trying to understand why a rural clinic would maintain expensive overnight operations if they weren't actually treating emergency patients. Margaret's eyes flicked to the clock, 7:45 p.m. "We have our regulars," she said vaguely. "Medication pickups, scheduled treatments." At precisely 8 p.m., she grabbed her purse from beneath the nurse's station and headed for the door. "What about report?" I called after her. "You didn't tell me about any patients." She paused, hand on the exit door. "Everything you need to know is in that envelope," she said. Then, with what almost looked like pity, "Good luck, Ellie." The door swung shut behind her with a soft click, and the automatic lock engaged. I was alone in the silent clinic. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a plain font. "Night protocol for Whispering Pines. Rural Health Clinic. 1. Remain at the nurse's station between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m., except when Rule 5 applies. Do not wander the facility. 2. If the phone rings exactly 3 times and stops, do not answer. If it rings more or fewer times, answer with the greeting, 'Whispering Pines, how may I direct your healing?' 3. Medication requests must be processed within 15 minutes of receipt. Place the medication in the pneumatic tube system, regardless of its size. Do not question how larger items fit. 4. If the lights flicker, immediately recite the Hippocratic Oath in its entirety. Keep a copy on your person at all times. 5. Room 7 must be checked every hour on the hour. If the bed is occupied, document the patient's vitals in the blue logbook only. Never use the electronic system for these patients. 6. If you hear children laughing, close your eyes and count backward from 10. Do not open your eyes until the laughing stops, no matter how long it takes. 7. Never acknowledge the elderly man who reads magazines in the waiting room. He is not a patient. 8. The supply closet inventory must not be checked between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. 9. If a staff member you don't recognize asks for your assistance, verify they have a shadow before helping them. 10. The emergency exit door will sound an alarm if opened between sunset and sunrise. Do not attempt to silence this alarm if it activates. 11. Should all monitors in the nurse's station display the same vital signs simultaneously, initiate Protocol 23C, Documentation in red binder under counter. 12. If you find additional rules, implement them immediately. At the bottom, in handwritten script that conveyed both urgency and resignation. These rules keep our patients safe. More importantly, they keep you safe. Breaking them is not an option if you want to see the sunrise. I stared at the page, a nervous laugh bubbling up in my throat. This had to be some kind of joke, a prank they played on new night nurses. Hazing, basically. But then the lights flickered. Just once, a momentary dimming, and I found myself fumbling for the small card in my badge holder, where I'd tucked a copy of the Hippocratic Oath during nursing school graduation. First, do no harm, I began, my voice sounding small in the empty clinic. The light steadied, and I continued reading the rules, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. The joke theory was rapidly losing ground. My watch beeped softly. 9 p.m. According to Rule 5, I needed to check room 7. As I stood, my legs unsteady beneath me, the phone at the nurse's station rang. It rang precisely 3 times, then stopped. I froze, Rule 2 echoing in my mind. If the phone rings exactly 3 times and stops, do not answer. I hadn't touched the phone, but somehow I knew I'd just passed my first test. The corridor to room 7 seemed longer than it had during orientation, the overhead fluorescents casting harsh shadows that seemed to move just outside my field of vision. I clutched my stethoscope like a talisman, the metal cold against my palm. When I reached room 7, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk out of the clinic, get in my car, and never come back. Instead, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, the hospital bed neatly made, the monitor dark and silent. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and turned to leave. That's when I noticed the blue logbook on the bedside table, its cover worn and faded. Curiosity overcoming my fear, I opened it. Names filled the pages, hundreds of them, along with dates, times, and vital signs. Some notations I recognized as standard medical terminology, but others were written in what appeared to be Latin or something even older. The most recent entry was dated yesterday, the handwriting shaky and pressed hard into the paper. Patient presented with absence of self, treatment, remembrance therapy, prognosis, terminal identity, dissolution. I closed the book, my hands trembling. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't hazing. Whatever happened at Whispering Pines during the night shift was real, and I was now part of it. As I returned to the nurse's station, I heard it. The faint sound of children's laughter echoing down the hallway from a wing that should have been empty. I closed my eyes and began to count backward from 10, praying that the laughter would stop before I reached 1. 7, 6, 5. The children's laughter grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't the cheerful sound of kids playing. It was wrong somehow, too synchronized, too deliberate, and it was getting closer. 4, 3. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed for me to open my eyes, to see what was coming down that hallway toward me. 2, 1. Silence fell abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. I waited 3 more agonizing seconds before opening my eyes. The hallway was empty. No children, no footprints on the recently mopped floor. Nothing but the antiseptic smell of hospital cleaner and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. I hurried back to the nurse's station, clutching the rules paper like a lifeline. Collapsing into the worn office chair, I tried to calm my breathing. What the hell kind of place was this? The computer screen glowed softly, showing the electronic health record system waiting for login credentials. I typed in the temporary password Harmon had given me and pulled up the patient census. Empty. According to the system, Whispering Pines had no current patients. Then what was the blue logbook for? Who were all those names? A soft whoosh startled me, the pneumatic tube system coming to life. A cylinder dropped into the collection basket. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. Medication requests must be processed within 15 minutes of receipt. With shaking hands, I opened the cylinder. Inside was a small piece of paper with spidery handwriting. Mr. Stevens, Room 4, morphine 4 milligrams IV push. For the pain that doesn't exist. No doctor's signature, no patient in the electronic system, just a medication request that made no sense for a patient who, officially, wasn't here. I glanced at my watch. 9:17 p.m. According to Rule 3, I had until 9:32 to deliver the medication. The pharmacy was at the end of the hall, behind a heavy metal gate. The key hung on a hook behind the nurse's station, labeled simply Farm. I grabbed it and headed down the corridor, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. The pharmacy was small, but well stocked, with neatly labeled medications on metal shelves. I found the morphine in the locked narcotic cabinet, my nursing training taking over despite my fear. 4 milligrams, drawn into a syringe, labeled with the patient's name and dose. As I prepared the medication, I debated whether to follow this bizarre request. Administering narcotics to a non-existent patient went against everything I'd learned in nursing school. It could cost me my license. But breaking the rules here seemed to carry consequences far worse than professional sanctions. I placed the syringe in a new pneumatic tube cylinder, sent it off, and documented the dose in the narcotic log. Then I added my own note, administered per protocol, patient not in EMR, verify order with doctor, blank. I realized I didn't even know which doctor had supposedly ordered this. The tube whooshed away. I checked my watch again. 9:26 p.m., 6 minutes to spare. The phone rang, not 3 times, but continuously. I remembered Rule 2 and picked up on the 4th ring. Whispering Pines, how may I direct your healing? The prescribed greeting felt strange on my tongue. Silence on the other end. Then a wet, rattling breath. "Hello," I said. "This is the night nurse. Can I help you?" More breathing, then a voice that sounded like it was pushing through fluid. "Ellie Martin." New blood. Ice flooded my veins. I hadn't told anyone my last name tonight. "Who is this?" I demanded. "Check room 4, the voice gurgled. "He's waiting for his medicine." The line went dead. Room 4. According to the medication request, that's where Mr. Stevens was supposed to be. The patient who didn't exist in the system. I glanced at the rules again. Nothing specifically stated I couldn't check other rooms, just that I had to check room 7 every hour. Still, Rule 1 was clear about staying at the nurse's station, except when Rule 5 applied. But the call? Was that an official part of the protocol? The rules didn't mention phone calls telling me to check on patients. Minutes ticked by as I debated what to do. Finally, my nursing instincts won out. If there really was a patient in pain waiting for medication, I couldn't just ignore them. I made my way to room 4, stethoscope around my neck and the rules paper folded in my pocket. The door was closed. No sound came from within. I knocked gently. "Mr. Stevens? It's the nurse. May I come in?" No answer. I pushed the door open slowly, mentally preparing for whatever strangeness might await me. The room was dark except for the glow of vital sign monitors. A figure lay in the bed, completely covered by a white sheet, perfectly still. No movement, not even the rise and fall of breathing. My mouth went dry. "Mr. Stevens?" The monitors showed normal vital signs: heart rate 72, blood pressure 120/80, oxygen saturation 98%. Textbook perfect. Too perfect. I approached the bed cautiously. "Sir, I need to check on you." My hand hovered over the edge of the sheet. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind, warning me not to look underneath. But I was a nurse. This was my job. I pulled back the sheet. There was nothing there. Not nothing, as in an empty bed. Nothing, as in a void. A perfect absence of anything. Like looking into a hole cut in reality. The sheet had been draped over empty space that somehow had depth without dimension. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. The monitors continued to beep steadily, measuring the vital signs of nothing. The room's temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me. The void in the bed seemed to pulse, to reach toward me. I ran. Out of room 4, down the hallway, back to the nurse's station. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I collapsed into the chair, gasping for breath, trying to process what I'd just seen. The pneumatic tube system activated again. A cylinder dropped into the basket. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was my syringe of morphine, empty now, and a note in the same spidery handwriting. "Thank you, Nurse Martin. The nothing doesn't hurt anymore." I dropped the note as if it had burned me. The clock on the wall read 9:58 p.m. Almost time to check room 7 again. For a moment, I seriously considered walking out the main entrance, getting in my car, and driving away from Whispering Pines forever. Student loans be damned. But something told me the clinic wouldn't let me leave that easily. Not now that I'd seen what was in room 4. Not now that I'd administered medication to the nothing. My watch beeped. 10 p.m. Rule 5. Room 7 must be checked every hour on the hour. I stood on shaky legs and forced myself to walk back down that long hallway. This time, I noticed details I'd missed before. The slight discoloration of the ceiling tiles, as if from old water damage. The faint red streaks near the baseboards that could have been rust or something else. The way the overhead lights flickered almost imperceptibly when I walked directly beneath them. Room 7's door was ajar now, though I distinctly remembered closing it after my last check. A soft light spilled from the crack. I pushed the door open. This time the bed was occupied. An elderly woman lay against the white pillows. Her silver hair fanned out around her papery face. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She looked normal, like any elderly patient you might find in a hospital. Relief washed over me. Whatever strangeness pervaded Whispering Pines, at least this was something familiar. A regular patient needing regular care. I approached the bedside, retrieving the blue log book from the table. "Hello, ma'am," I said softly. "I'm Ellie, the night nurse. I just need to check your vitals." The woman's eyes snapped open. They were milky white, no pupils, no irises. "You're not Margaret," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. I swallowed hard. "No, ma'am. Margaret is the evening nurse. I'm the new night nurse." "New blood," she whispered, the same words from the phone call. Her blind eyes somehow seemed to focus directly on me. They always bring in new blood when the old ones see too much. My hand shook as I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her thin arm. "I need to record your vitals." My heart stopped beating in 1973, child. She smiled, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp to be human. "But go ahead. The forms must be respected." Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I placed my stethoscope on her chest. To my shock, I heard a heartbeat, slow but steady. The blood pressure cuff registered 110/70. Her skin was warm to the touch. I recorded the vitals in the blue logbook, noting that the previous entry for this same bed showed completely different measurements and a different patient name. Where the last nurse had written Thomas Wilkins, I now wrote Jane Doe, since the woman hadn't offered her name. "I'm not Jane," the woman said, watching me write. "I'm Elizabeth Corwin. I've been waiting for you." I froze, pen hovering above the paper. Waiting for me? Why? She reached for my hand with surprising strength. Her fingers were ice cold, despite her warm skin. "Because you're the one who's going to let us out." "Let who out?" I asked, trying to pull away without being obvious. Her milky eyes seemed to swirl with something dark moving beneath the surface. All of us. Everyone who's been trapped here since the mistake. What mistake? Elizabeth's face contorted, the wrinkles deepening into crevices that seemed too numerous, too geometric. The surgery in 1954, the one that went wrong, the one that tore the veil. My mouth went dry. I don't understand. You will. Her grip tightened. Check the basement records. October 17th, 1954. Dr. Malcolm Pierce, patient 0. The overhead lights flickered violently. Elizabeth's eyes rolled back in her head, and she began to convulse. "Help!" I called out instinctively, forgetting for a moment that I was alone in the clinic. Code blue. Elizabeth's body arched off the bed, her mouth opening impossibly wide. A sound emerged, not a human sound, but a high-pitched keening that made my fillings ache. The lights continued to flicker. Rule 4. If the lights flicker, immediately recite the Hippocratic Oath in its entirety. I swear by Apollo the physician, and Asclepius, and Hygeia, and Panacea, and all the gods and goddesses as my witnesses. I began reciting frantically, struggling to remember the words, while Elizabeth's body contorted in ways that shouldn't be anatomically possible. As I continued the oath, Elizabeth's convulsions gradually subsided. By the time I reached, "I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm," her body had settled back onto the bed, the inhuman keening reduced to a soft whimper. When I finished the oath, the lights stabilized. Elizabeth lay still, her eyes closed once more, looking again like nothing more than a frail, elderly woman. I checked her vitals again. Normal, as if nothing had happened. With shaking hands, I completed the entry in the blue logbook. Under notes, I wrote, "Patient experienced seizure-like activity, resolved with protocol intervention. Patient provided name, Elizabeth Corwin. Mentioned basement records from 1954. I closed the book and placed it back on the table. Elizabeth appeared to be sleeping peacefully now, her chest rising and falling with regular breaths. As I turned to leave, her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. "They won't tell you the last rule," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "The one that matters most." "What rule?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "When the clock strikes 3 and all the patients cry, do not, under any circumstances, open the red door." Her hand fell away. She was asleep, or pretending to be. I backed out of room 7, closed the door, and leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. What red door? There was no red door on the floor plan Margaret had shown me. As I made my way back to the nurse's station, I checked my watch. 10:22 p.m. Not even halfway through my first night, and already I'd encountered a void instead of a patient. Administered medication to nothing, and witnessed an old woman with too many teeth have a seizure while telling me cryptic things about a surgical mistake. I didn't know what was worse, the possibility that I was losing my mind, or the possibility that everything happening at Whispering Pines was real. When I reached the nurse's station, the pneumatic tube system activated again. This time, the cylinder contained a single red pill and a note. "Take this when you're ready to see. But remember, once the veil is lifted, it can never be replaced." I set the pill aside, not trusting anything in this place. As I did, I noticed a manila folder that hadn't been on the desk before. The tab was labeled 1954, Confidential. Elizabeth's words echoed in my mind. Check the basement records. October 17th, 1954. Doctor, Malcolm Pierce, patient 0. The folder seemed to be offering answers, but as I reached for it, I couldn't shake the feeling that opening it would change everything. That once I knew the truth about Whispering Pines, there would be no going back to the person I was before. My hand hovered over the folder. Did I really want to know? In the distance, I heard the faint sound of children's laughter beginning again. The children's laughter faded as I counted backward. Something cold brushed my leg, leaving dark residue on my skin. The manila folder still waited on the desk. The computer screen flickered with a message. "The folders are part of your orientation. Reading them does not violate rules." Inside was a yellowed report from October 17th, 1954. It described an experimental trepanation performed by Dr. Malcolm Pierce that went horribly wrong. At 3:17 a.m., the patient seized, spoke in an unknown language, and a darkness deeper than absence of light appeared in the surgical opening. The report mentioned dimensional stability and Protocol 23C. Most disturbing was the note. "The veil between worlds is thinnest at 3:17 a.m. A photograph showed the surgical team, including Elizabeth Corwin, identical to my room 7 patient, not aged at all. Another face matched the elderly man from the waiting room. The names on the back included Thomas Stevens, the name from room 4's medication request. The phone rang 7 times. I answered with the prescribed greeting. "This is Dr. Harmon," said an authoritative voice. When I asked about Protocol 23C, he called it a contingency plan for containing breaches of reality. He directed me to review the red binder before 3 a.m. "What is the red door?" I asked. Silence then. There is no red door at Whispering Pines. His tone was ice. After hanging up, I found the red binder under the counter. Before I could open it, I noticed the dark substance on my hand spreading up my wrist. Panicked, I scrubbed with hand sanitizer until it retreated. My watch beeped 11 p.m. Time to check room 7. Elizabeth's appearance had changed slightly. Damp sheets, black streaks in her silver hair, red veins spreading through her milky eyes. "You read the file," she said. "I'm still a nurse, just on the other side now." She gripped my wrist with impossible strength. "Tonight is special. 70 years to the day. The circle completes. The door opens fully at 3:17. Her face rippled unnaturally. "They're preparing the bridge, and you, Ellie Martin, are the final plank." I pulled away, clutching the red binder. In the hallway, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before, painted brown with red showing through the flaking paint. The red door that supposedly didn't exist. The pneumatic tube system activated with a soft whoosh. Inside the cylinder, I found a syringe filled with dark red liquid and a note. "Administered to self at 3:15 a.m. Mandatory protocol for all night staff on anniversary dates." Blood. They wanted me to inject myself with blood. I opened the red binder labeled 23C. Its contents confirmed my growing dread. At 3:17 a.m., I was expected to inject myself with the communion, escort the transit patient to the threshold, and open the door between worlds. The final note warned that failure to complete the protocol had resulted in 17 casualties the last time the cycle was broken. My options were limited. Follow the protocol and become some kind of gatekeeper between worlds, refuse and risk catastrophe, or find a way to escape before 3:17 a.m. Dr. Pierce's words echoed in my mind. The key is in the blue book. I glanced at my watch. 11:47 p.m. Just over 3 hours until whatever was happening reached its climax. Purposefully, I walked back toward room 4. The void patient, Stevens, might have more information. The morphine's wearing off, came the whisper from the darkness as I approached. I'll get you something stronger, I promised. But first, I need to understand what's happening tonight. The void pulsed slightly. The 70-year cycle completes. Without a guardian to control the threshold, what comes through will make the nothing seem like a blessing. What did Pierce mean about a key in the blue book? A long pause. The logbook records more than vital signs. It maps the flow between worlds. The sequence is the key. Before I could ask more, the lights flickered violently. I recited the Hippocratic Oath until they stabilized. Go, the nothing urged. Time grows short. I hurried to room 7, my heart pounding. Elizabeth lay in bed, her eyes closed, seemingly asleep. The blue logbook sat on the bedside table. I picked it up, careful not to wake her. Flipping through the pages, I noticed something odd. Certain numbers in the vital signs were underlined subtly, almost imperceptibly, with the faintest of marks. When I arranged these numbers in sequence, they formed a pattern. 71954, July 19th, 1954. 3 months before the incident that tore the veil. I continued through the book, finding more sequences hidden in the vital signs. They formed dates, room numbers, and what looked like procedural codes. Together, they told a story different from what the 1954 report had claimed. The tear in reality hadn't been an accident. Pierce and his team had deliberately attempted to open a doorway, using patients from the mental hospital as test subjects. But something had gone wrong, or perhaps too right. The door had opened, but what came through wasn't what they had expected. And now, 70 years later, the cycle was completing. Whatever entities had partially crossed over needed a night nurse with the sight to fully manifest in our world. Elizabeth's eyes snapped open, startling me. Finding answers, little nurse? Her voice had changed, deeper and resonant with multiple tones layered beneath. What happens if I don't open the door? I asked, clutching the blue book. Her smile stretched too wide. The pressure builds. The tear widens uncontrolled. Instead of a doorway, a breach. Instead of selected transits, a flood. She tilted her head unnaturally. But there is another way. The original team found it too late. What other way? The sequence can reverse the tear, close it permanently. Her expression darkened. But the cost is high. A life freely given at the threshold. A sacrifice, just as the nothing had mentioned. The overhead lights dimmed, then brightened to painful intensity. Elizabeth's form seemed to shimmer, becoming less solid. Time compresses near the cycle's completion, she warned. Midnight approaches, but 3:17 comes faster than you think. My watch beeped. 12 a.m. The witching hour had arrived, and with it, the realization that I might be the only one who could stop whatever was coming through that red door. Midnight at Whispering Pines brought a subtle but unmistakable change. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in my peripheral vision. The fluorescent lights hummed at a lower pitch. The air felt thicker, almost gelatinous in my lungs. I needed to check room 7 again at 1 a.m. But first, I had to understand the sequence in the Blue Book. Returning to the nurse's station, I spread my findings on the desk. The dates, room numbers, and procedural codes I'd extracted from the underlined vital signs. A pattern was emerging. The original team had performed a series of procedures building up to the October 17th event, preparing patients and staff alike. The Blue Book documented not just Elizabeth Corwin's current vital signs, but a continuous record stretching back decades, different handwriting from different night nurses, all recording the slow transformation of something not quite human, wearing Elizabeth's form. The phone rang 3 times and stopped. I didn't answer. Minutes later, it rang again, 7 times. Following Rule 2, I picked up. "Nurse Martin." Dr. Harmon's voice sounded strained. "Have you reviewed Protocol 23C? "Yes, doctor." "Good. The transit patient in room 7 will need preparation at 2 a.m. The medication is in the second drawer of the treatment cart." "What exactly am I preparing her for?" I asked, feigning ignorance while my hand tightened around the Blue Book. A pause. "She's returning home, Nurse Martin, after a very long stay." "And my role? The syringe of blood I'm supposed to inject myself with?" "A formality," he said smoothly. "It allows you to perceive the threshold correctly, to serve as guardian." Lies. According to the hidden records, the communion transformed night nurses into anchors, living tethers that kept the door from closing after the transit patient crossed, allowing others to follow. "Of course, doctor. I'll handle the preparations." After hanging up, I returned to my research with renewed urgency. If I could decode the complete sequence, perhaps I could reverse the tear without sacrificing myself. There had to be another way. The pneumatic tube activated again. This time, the cylinder contained a small brass key and a note in shaky handwriting. "Find the basement access. What you seek is in cold storage. MP, Malcolm Pierce." The doctor I wasn't supposed to acknowledge was helping me. The hospital layout showed no basement on the orientation floor plan, but older buildings in rural Ohio often had cellars or storm shelters. I had to find it. First, I checked the supply closet. Rule 8 specified it must not be checked between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., which suggested something important was there. Inside, behind shelves of gauze and surgical supplies, I found a metal door with a keyhole that matched the brass key. It opened to reveal narrow stairs descending into darkness. I hesitated, remembering Rule 1, remain at the nurse's station except when Rule 5 applies. But time was running short. My watch read 12:43 a.m., but the shadows on the wall suggested a later hour. Taking a deep breath, I descended the stairs, using my phone's flashlight to guide the way. The basement was a single room filled with old medical equipment and filing cabinets. A large freezer hummed in the corner, cold storage stenciled on its side. Inside, neatly labeled specimens filled the shelves, tissue samples dating back decades. One container stood apart from the others, larger and marked with a red biohazard symbol. Its label read, "Patient 0, original tissue, October 17th, 1954. The specimen inside wasn't human tissue. It pulsed with a darkness that seemed to absorb my flashlight's beam. The same darkness I'd seen in room 4's void. As I stared, the specimen moved, pressing against the container glass as if sensing my presence. A noise behind me. I turned to see Elizabeth Corwin standing at the foot of the stairs, her form elongated, joints bent at impossible angles. "Clever nurse," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Finding the source, but it's too late now. I glanced at my watch, still showing 12:47 a.m., but the large clock on the basement wall read 2:33 a.m. Time slips near the cycle's end, Elizabeth explained, gliding closer. The threshold already prepares to open. I grabbed the specimen container, backing away. I know about the sequence. I can reverse what was done. Her face split in a too-wide grin. The door swings both ways, little nurse. The question is, which side are you truly on? The lights flickered violently. I began reciting the Hippocratic Oath, but Elizabeth's laughter drowned out my words as darkness descended. The basement lights returned, flickering weakly. Elizabeth stood between me and the stairs, her body contorting in ways that defied human anatomy. The specimen container felt ice cold in my hands, the darkness inside pulsing in rhythm with Elizabeth's movements. "That doesn't belong to you," she said, her voice now a chorus of overlapping tones. "It's part of us, the first fragment that crossed through." "What exactly are you?" I asked, playing for time as I edged toward an old steel cabinet. If I could get around it, I might reach the stairs. Elizabeth's smile stretched until it nearly bisected her face. "We are the nothing that waits between worlds, the void given purpose." She tilted her head at an impossible angle. "We've been patient, Nurse Martin. So patient, sending only small pieces through each time the veil thins. But tonight..." Her fingers elongated, stretching into talon-like appendages. "Tonight, we come through completely. Why this clinic? Why here? This place sits on a convergence, a natural weakness in reality." She took a step forward, her movements jerky like stop-motion animation. Pierce and his team didn't create the tear. They simply widened an existing crack, gave us our first real opening. The specimen in the container writhed more violently as Elizabeth approached. I could feel it growing warmer, responding to her proximity. "And what happens if you come through completely?" I asked, my back now against the cabinet. "Change," she said simply. "Your world remade in our image, the nothing becoming everything." In one fluid motion, I shoved the heavy cabinet toward her and sprinted for the stairs. Elizabeth screeched, a sound no human throat could produce, as the cabinet crashed into her. But instead of falling, her body seemed to flow around it, becoming momentarily two-dimensional before reforming. I raced up the stairs, clutching the specimen container. The door at the top slammed shut just as I reached it. Locked. "There's nowhere to run, little nurse," Elizabeth called from below, her voice closer than it should have been. "The threshold opens soon. Your only choice is whether you serve willingly or not." The brass key. I fumbled in my pocket, finding it among the syringes I'd collected earlier. With shaking hands, I jammed it into the lock and turned. The door swung open, and I stumbled into the supply closet. As I slammed the door behind me, something heavy hit the other side. Elizabeth, moving faster than should be possible. A quick glance at my watch showed 1:03 a.m., but I no longer trusted it. The clinic's reality was warping as 3:17 approached. I needed to find the red door and understand how to use the sequence to reverse the tear. The corridor outside the supply closet was transformed. The walls pulsed with visible veins of darkness, spreading like infection through the drywall. The floor beneath my feet felt spongy, yielding with each step as if I were walking on living tissue. Room 7 was empty when I checked it, the sheets twisted and damp, as if Elizabeth had shed them like a snake's skin before following me to the basement. The blue book still sat on the bedside table. I grabbed it, tucking it under my arm alongside the specimen container. At the nurse's station, All the monitors displayed the same vital signs: heart rate 317, blood pressure 31/7, oxygen saturation 54%. The numbers corresponded to the date and time, 3:17 a.m., the moment the veil would thin completely. Rule 11. Should all monitors in the nurse's station display the same vital signs simultaneously? Initiate Protocol 23C. I opened the red binder again, scanning for anything I might have missed. The final pages contained diagrams of the threshold, the red door, showing it as a literal doorway between dimensions. According to the notes, the door required a guardian to regulate what passed through. Without one, the opening would expand uncontrollably. The children's laughter started again, louder than before. I didn't close my eyes this time. Instead, I watched as shadowy figures materialized in the corridor, small, child-sized forms, with elongated limbs and heads that tilted at curious angles. They circled the nurse's station, their movements synchronized. "She found the first seed," one whispered in a voice like grinding glass. "She knows the sequence," another responded. "It doesn't matter," said a third. "Time is almost up." They vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, their laughter lingering in the air. I turned my attention back to the blue book, frantically searching for the final pieces of the sequence. The most recent entries, my own recordings of Elizabeth's vital signs, completed the pattern. When arranged correctly, the numbers formed a sequence of actions. Return the original specimen to the tear. Recite the reversal incantation, a series of numbers and Latin phrases. Close the door at precisely 3:27 a.m., 10 minutes after it fully opened seal, with the blood of the threshold guardian. The last requirement gave me pause. The blood of the guardian, my blood, would seal the door. But how much blood? Would it require my death, as Elizabeth had suggested? The pneumatic tube system activated again. This time, the cylinder contained a scalpel and a note in what I recognized as Doctor. Pierce's handwriting. "A willing sacrifice gives power to the sealing, but a life freely offered need not be fully spent. The threshold requires intent more than quantity. Make your choice wisely, Nurse Martin." Hope flickered. Perhaps I could seal the door without dying in the process. The overhead lights flickered again, more violently this time. I began the Hippocratic Oath automatically, but the words caught in my throat as I saw what was happening to the clinic around me. The walls were dissolving, reality peeling away to reveal glimpses of elsewhere. A vast darkness populated with shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The void of room 4 was spreading, consuming the physical structure of Whispering Pines. The clinic's clock on the wall showed 2:45 a.m. Time was accelerating as the moment of transition approached. A scream echoed from down the hallway. Human. Terrified. I ran toward it, finding the door to room 4 wide open. Inside, a middle-aged man was backing away from the bed where the nothing had been. Except the nothing was taking form now, a black silhouette filling out with features that approximated Thomas Stevens from the photograph. "You shouldn't be here," I told the man, recognizing him as Dr. Harmon. Not the ancient Dr. Harmon from 1954, but the current hospital administrator who'd hired me. "It's not safe." "What have you done?" he demanded, his face pale with terror. "The protocols. You were supposed to follow the protocols." "Your protocols would let them through," I said, clutching the specimen container. "The original team knew how to reverse it. They just didn't have the courage." Stevens, or what was becoming Stevens, rose from the bed, darkness still clinging to him like smoke. "She's right, Harmon. We've been using you all for decades, preparing for tonight. His voice sounded hollow, echoing as if from a great distance. The faithful guardian arrives with fresh blood, just as we arranged. Harmon backed away. This isn't what we agreed. You promised knowledge, power, and you'll have it, Stevens assured him, his form solidifying further. Just not as you imagined. Darkness erupted from Stevens's body, engulfing Harmon before I could react. The administrator's scream cut off abruptly as the blackness wrapped around him like a cocoon. When it receded, Harmon stood changed, his eyes now empty pits, his skin gray and lifeless. The red door, Stevens said, turning to me. It's time, Nurse Martin. Will you open it as guardian, or shall we force our way through? Behind me, I felt Elizabeth's presence, a cold weight pressing against reality itself. Before me stood Stevens and the thing wearing Harmon's body. The red door waited somewhere ahead, the final threshold between worlds, and I held both the means to open it and the sequence to seal it forever. Scene 6. The red door. The corridor stretched before me, impossibly long and pulsing with veins of darkness. Behind me, Stevens and the thing wearing Harmon's body advanced slowly, confident in their inevitability. Elizabeth's presence lingered somewhere nearby, watching, waiting. I clutched the specimen container in one hand, the blue book in the other, and ran. The clinic had transformed beyond recognition. Doorways opened onto vistas that couldn't exist in our reality. Vast, empty spaces filled with geometric shapes that folded in on themselves. Misty landscapes where shadowy figures stood motionless, watching. The floor beneath my feet became transparent in patches, revealing an abyss that seemed to extend forever. At the end of the corridor stood the door. No longer disguised with brown paint, it gleamed a deep crimson that seemed to absorb the light around it. Symbols carved into its surface matched those in the blue book, the sequence I needed to reverse the tear. The wall clock beside it showed 3:09 a.m. 8 minutes until the threshold opened fully. "You can't stop it," Stevens called from behind me, his voice resonating with multiple tones. "The cycle completes tonight. 70 years of preparation." I reached the red door and placed my hand against it. The surface felt warm, almost feverish, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The brass knob turned easily under my touch, but I didn't open it yet. Not until I was ready. "I know what you are," I said, turning to face my pursuers. "I know what happens if you come through completely." Stevens smiled, his features now fully formed but wrong somehow. Too sharp, too symmetrical. "You know nothing. Your world is a shadow of possibilities. We bring completion." "Completion or consumption?" I asked, playing for time as I set down the blue book and retrieved the scalpel from my pocket. The sequence required my blood to seal the door, but first, I needed to return the original specimen to the tear. The entity wearing Harmon moved forward, jerky and uncoordinated like a puppet with tangled strings. "Stop her," it said, its voice distorted. "She has the first seed." Stevens's expression changed, noticing the specimen container for the first time. "Where did you get that?" "The basement, cold storage." I held it up. "The original tissue sample from 1954. The first piece of your world that crossed into ours." Fear flickered across Stevens's too perfect face. "Give it to me." "Why? What happens if I return it to where it came from?" Elizabeth materialized beside Stevens, her form now barely human, elongated limbs, torso twisted at an impossible angle, face stretched into a permanent rictus smile. "The cycle breaks," she hissed. "The bridge weakens." That confirmed what I'd pieced together from the blue book. The specimen was a fragment of their reality, an anchor point that had allowed the tear to remain open for 70 years. Returning it would begin the process of closing the breach. The wall clock ticked over to 3:14 a.m. "You'll die if you try," Elizabeth warned, her body undulating unnaturally. The threshold guardian becomes part of the door, forever. Dr. Pierce's note echoed in my mind. A willing sacrifice gives power to the ceiling, but a life freely offered need not be fully spent. I had to risk it. The alternative was letting these entities remake our world in their image, the nothing becoming everything. "Stand aside," commanded a new voice. Dr. Pierce materialized between me and the entities, his elderly form somehow more substantial than before. "The night nurse has made her choice," Stevens hissed. "You cannot interfere, Pierce. You're not even truly here." "Neither are you, old friend." Pierce's form flickered like a bad television signal. Just fragments caught between worlds. But I've had 70 years to learn the rules of this place. The overhead lights began to flicker violently. Elizabeth, Stevens, and the thing wearing Harmon convulsed in unison, their forms destabilizing. Pierce turned to me. "Recite the oath, now." I began the Hippocratic Oath, my voice stronger than it had been before. As I spoke, Pierce seemed to grow more solid while the entities became increasingly transparent. "The door," Pierce urged when I finished. "Open it now at exactly 3:17. The wall clock clicked to 3:17 a.m. precisely. I turned the knob and threw the red door open. Beyond it was not another room, but a vast, swirling vortex of darkness. Not empty, but filled with movement, with intention. The nothing that was everything. The void between worlds. A powerful wind began pulling everything toward the doorway. Papers, medical supplies, and loose equipment flew past me into the void. The entities shrieked in triumph, believing their moment had come. "Now," Pierce shouted over the maelstrom. "Return the specimen and begin the sequence." With all my strength, I hurled the container into the heart of the vortex. It shattered upon impact, the darkness inside rejoining the greater whole. The effect was immediate. The pull intensified, and the edges of the doorway began to waver. "The sequence," Pierce reminded me, his form starting to blur at the edges. I opened the blue book to the final page where I'd written out the complete pattern. The words weren't in any language I recognized, but they flowed from my lips as if I had known them all my life. As I spoke, the entities realized what was happening. They lunged toward me, their forms stretching across the corridor like living shadows. But Pierce moved to intercept them, his presence creating a barrier they couldn't cross. "Complete it, Nurse Martin," he called, his voice fading. "The sacrifice. The final step." I drew the scalpel across my palm, the pain sharp and clarifying. Blood welled immediately. Following the diagram in the blue book, I pressed my bleeding hand against the doorframe, tracing a specific pattern with my blood. The effect was electric. Energy surged through me, connecting me to the door itself. I could feel the vast nothingness beyond, feel it recoil as the sequence activated. The tear began to close, reality knitting itself back together. The entities howled in rage and desperation. Elizabeth lunged forward, breaking past Pierce's fading form. Her elongated fingers wrapped around my ankle, pulling me toward the vortex. "If we return, you come with us," she shrieked. I clung to the doorframe, my blood-smeared handprint pulsing with light. The pull was incredible, threatening to tear me in half. If I lost my grip, I would be dragged into the void between worlds. Stevens and the Harmon thing joined Elizabeth, their combined force nearly irresistible. My fingers began to slip. Then I felt hands steadying me. Pierce, and behind him, shadowy forms of others. The night nurses who had come before me. Those who had followed the rules, who had maintained the balance for decades. The door must close at exactly 3:27, Pierce said, his voice barely audible over the roaring void. Hold on until then. The clock seemed frozen, seconds stretching into eternities as the entities pulled and reality itself heaved around us. My blood continued to trace patterns on the doorframe of its own accord, the symbols from the blue book manifesting in crimson. Elizabeth's grip tightened painfully. We've waited too long to be denied. You don't belong here, I gasped, maintaining my hold on the frame. Go back to the nothing. The clock finally ticked over to 3:27 a.m. Close it, Pierce commanded. Now. With the last of my strength, I pulled the red door toward me, fighting against the hurricane-force wind. The edges of the doorway burned with blue fire as reality reasserted itself. Elizabeth screamed, her grip on my ankle faltering as she began to dissolve, pulled back toward the void. Stevens and the Harmon thing followed, their forms stretching like taffy before snapping back toward the vortex. The door inched closer to the frame. Through the narrowing gap, I caught one last glimpse of the nothing, a vast consciousness composed of darkness and hunger, watching me with awareness that transcended physical eyes. Then the door slammed shut with concussive force, the sound echoing through whispering pines like a thunderclap. Silence fell. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted beyond measure, my cut hand throbbing. The symbols I'd traced in blood glowed briefly, then sank into the wood of the door, disappearing entirely. Pierce knelt beside me, his form growing more transparent by the second. It's done, he said softly. The tear is sealed. After 70 years, my mistake is finally corrected. Did I? I struggled to form words, my strength completely spent. Did I stop them? Pierce smiled sadly. For now. Reality has weak points, Nurse Martin. Other doors, other guardians. He glanced at the red door, now fading to an ordinary brown. But this clinic will trouble no one again. As he spoke, the supernatural distortions began to recede. The walls returned to normal, the strange vistas visible through doorways fading back to ordinary patient rooms. The overhead lights stabilized, casting a steady fluorescent glow. What happens now? I asked, watching Pierce fade further. Now? You've earned the sunrise. His form was barely visible now. And tomorrow night, perhaps a different clinic, with different rules. The veil is thin in many places, Nurse Martin, and those with the sight are always needed. With that, he vanished completely, leaving me alone in the now ordinary hallway of a rural health clinic in Ohio. The wall clock read 3:30 a.m. 3.5 hours until dawn. I remained on the floor for several minutes, too exhausted to move. My hand throbbed where I'd cut it, blood slowly congealing around the wound. The clinic had returned to normal, just a dated, rural medical facility with outdated equipment and flickering fluorescent lights. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My uniform was torn and stained, my body aching as if I'd run a marathon. Leaning against the wall for support, I made my way back to the nurse's station. The pneumatic tube system activated one final time. Inside the cylinder was a clean bandage and a note. Thank you. No signature. No explanation needed. I dressed my wound and checked the clinic's monitors. All showed normal readouts now. No patients, no anomalies. The red binder containing Protocol 23C had vanished from the counter. The blue logbook was nowhere to be seen. My watch read 4:15 a.m. Less than 2 hours until my shift ended. Less than 2 hours until sunrise. Remembering my duties, I began checking the patient rooms systematically. Room 4 was empty. A standard hospital bed with neatly made sheets, no void, no evidence of Thomas Stevens or the nothing he had contained. Room 7 showed no sign of Elizabeth Corwin, just another empty bed in another empty room. In the waiting area, the magazines were neatly stacked, no elderly man reading room. The supply closet contained only supplies. The door to the basement nowhere to be found. It was as if the supernatural elements of Whispering Pines had never existed. Yet the bandage on my hand proved otherwise. The clinic's main entrance remained locked. Standard security protocol until 6 a.m. I returned to the nurse's station and sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how completely drained I felt. The phone rang, not 3 times, not 7, but continuously, until I answered. Whispering Pines. How may I direct your healing? The greeting came automatically to my lips. Ellie? It's Margaret. The evening nurse sounded confused. I just got a call from Administrator Harmon's wife. He never came home last night and isn't answering his cell. Have you seen him? I thought of the thing that had been wearing Harmon's body, pulled back into the void between worlds. No, I said truthfully. I haven't seen him since orientation yesterday. Margaret sighed. That's strange. He always checks in on night nurses during their first shift. A pause. How's it going anyway? Quiet night. I'd almost laughed. You could say that. The rules were very helpful. Rules? Margaret sounded genuinely puzzled. What rules? The night protocol, I said. The rules you follow during night shift. Silence on the line. Then cautiously. Ellie, there's no special protocol for nights. It's just basic nursing care. Are you feeling all right? A chill ran through me. Either Margaret was lying, keeping the truth from me even now, or she genuinely didn't know. Perhaps the rules only revealed themselves to those with the sight, as Pierce had called it. I'm fine, I assured her. Just tired. First night shift and all. Well, hang in there. Dawn comes eventually. She hung up. I sat back, considering my options. I could quit, walk away from Whispering Pines, and never look back. Find another nursing position somewhere with regular patients and standard procedures. Somewhere without red doors or nothing patients or rules that kept reality from tearing apart. But Pierce's final words echoed in my mind. The veil is thin in many places, Nurse Martin, and those with the sight are always needed. If I could see these things, these tears in reality, these entities trying to cross over, didn't I have a responsibility to help? How many other clinics, hospitals, or facilities had their own versions of Protocol 23C? How many other night nurses were following rules they didn't understand, maintaining barriers they couldn't see? The wall clock ticked steadily toward morning. 5:30 a.m. The sky outside began to lighten, the first hint of dawn breaking over the Ohio hills. As promised, I had earned the sunrise. The question was, what would I do with tomorrow's sunset? A soft sound drew my attention to the hallway. A child's laugh, barely audible. I closed my eyes and began counting backward from 10, following Rule 6-1, last time. When I opened my eyes, a small folded paper sat on the counter before me. I unfolded it to find a list, written in neat, precise handwriting. Night Protocol for Memorial Hospital, Columbus. All monitors must be checked in descending room order. Medication rooms are off limits between midnight and 2 a.m. The elevator must not be used if it arrives empty. The list continued for 12 items, ending with the familiar. If you find additional rules, implement them immediately. At the bottom was a job offer. Night nurse at Memorial Hospital in Columbus, starting next week. The salary was significantly higher than Whispering Pines. Outside, the sun crested the horizon, washing the clinic in golden light. My shift was over. One night completed, countless more beckoning. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, already knowing my answer. 3 weeks later, I stood at the nurses' station of Memorial Hospital's oncology ward, reviewing patient charts as midnight approached. My hand bore a thin white scar, the only physical reminder of that night at Whispering Pines. The ward was quiet, patients sleeping peacefully. A storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows, occasional lightning illuminating the corridor. On the desk before me sat a red binder labeled Special Protocols. Inside were the 12 rules I'd been given, plus 7 more I'd discovered since starting. Each night brought new challenges, new entities testing the boundaries between worlds. Each night, I served as guardian, following rules that kept both worlds safer. I wasn't alone. Other night nurses across the country had the site. We'd found each other through coded messages in nursing forums, sharing rules and protocols for different facilities. The elevator dinged at the end of the hall. The doors opened to reveal an empty car. Rule 3: the elevator must not be used if it arrives empty. I smiled and turned back to my charts. The night shift was just beginning.